10 years ago, my father stood on the marble steps of our estate while rain hammered against the columns and told me I was no longer his daughter. Not because I committed a crime, not because I betrayed him, because I fell in love with a man who didn't come with a trust fund. I remember the sound more than the words. The sound of my suitcase hitting wet stone. The sound of the front door slamming. The sound of my mother locking it from the inside. I stood there for almost a minute, staring at the house where I had spent 24 years of my life. Nobody came back. Nobody changed their mind. Not even when the rain soaked through my clothes. Not even when I whispered, "Dad." 10 years later, I'm standing on those same steps again. The rain is gone. The house is brighter. The people who threw me out will discover that I now own everything they ever used to measure their worth, including the ground beneath their feet. This is the story of how the poor man's wife became the woman holding the keys to my father's entire empire.
My name is Victoria Hale. At least, it used to be. For most of my life, my name opened doors. My father founded Hale International. My husband, Daniel, managed operations. I owned controlling shares. The company was my inheritance. The estate was my investment. The reputation was mine. Or at least it had been. Before Singapore. Before the disappearance. Before somebody decided I was more useful gone. The memory still arrives in fragments. An airport parking garage. Rainwater sliding down concrete pillars. A black van. A hand over my mouth. Then darkness. Months blurred together after that. Different rooms. Different cities. Different people speaking languages I barely understood. I learned quickly that survival wasn't dramatic. It wasn't bravery. It was routine. You wake up. You stay calm. You pay attention. You wait. You remember who you are. Because forgetting yourself is easier than most people realize. And once that happens, you never fully come back. I escaped 11 months later. Not through some clever master plan. Not through luck. Through patience. A door left unlocked. A distracted guard. A moment nobody expected me to take. By the time I reached an embassy and proved my identity, almost a year had passed. The entire flight home, I imagined Daniel waiting for me. I imagined tearful reunions. Police investigations. Family embraces. Questions. Relief. Love. I replayed those fantasies so many times they felt real. Then my taxi turned onto Crestwood Lane. And reality destroyed every single one. The estate appeared exactly as I remembered. 3 stories of white stone. Perfect gardens. Iron gates. Fountains illuminated by evening lights. Home. For a few seconds I almost cried. Then I noticed something strange. There were no reporters. No security upgrades. No signs of an active investigation. Nothing suggested the owner of the estate had recently returned from the dead. The property looked peaceful. Normal. Almost too normal. The taxi driver unloaded my bag. I walked toward the gate. And froze. Because someone stepped onto the second-floor balcony. A woman. Tall. Dark hair. My height. My posture. My face. My face. I remember gripping the iron fence so hard my hands hurt. She laughed at something behind her. Then Daniel appeared. He kissed her cheek. Casually. Comfortably. Like men do after months of routine affection. Not guilt. Not confusion. Routine. My stomach turned cold. For several seconds my brain refused to process what I was seeing. I honestly wondered if I had suffered some kind of psychological break. Maybe trauma had damaged my memory. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe. Then she turned slightly. And I recognized the emerald necklace. The one my grandmother left me. The one locked inside our bedroom safe. She wasn't just wearing my face. She was wearing my life. I left before anyone noticed me. Instinct took over. Years in business had taught me something valuable. Never walk into a room when you're the only person who doesn't know the rules. And clearly, I was the only person who didn't understand what was happening. I checked into a small hotel 20 miles away. Nothing glamorous. No marble floors. No private elevators. Just a quiet room overlooking a highway. The kind of place nobody notices. That night I didn't sleep. I sat beside the window and made a list. Facts only. No emotions. No assumptions. Fact number 1. Someone was impersonating me. Fact number 2. The impersonation appeared official. Fact number 3. Daniel knew. Fact number 4. My family knew. Fact number 5. Nobody had contacted authorities after my return. Which meant they either didn't know I was alive, or they desperately wanted everyone to believe I wasn't. The answer arrived 48 hours later. I hired a private investigator. A retired woman named Evelyn Ross. Sharp eyes. Minimal words. The type of person who charged expensive fees because she was worth them. When I showed her a photograph of myself and the woman from the balcony, she stared for nearly a minute. Then she quietly said, "That's impressive." "What is?" "The resemblance." I nodded. "I need to know who she is." Evelyn made 3 phone calls. Within 72 hours she returned. And changed everything. The file she placed on the table wasn't thick. It didn't need to be. The truth fit into 20 pages. The woman was named Claire Mercer. Former stage performer. Professional impersonation background. Financial problems. Several identity-related contracts overseas. Nothing criminal. Nothing public. Exactly the kind of person someone would hire if they wanted a convincing duplicate. I felt physically sick. But the next page was worse. Far worse. Because there was a contract. Not between Claire and some unknown organization. Between Claire and Daniel Hale. My husband. I stared at his signature. The familiar slant. The distinctive flourish beneath the last letter. There was no mistake. Daniel hadn't discovered the imposter. He had recruited her. According to the agreement, Claire would receive monthly payments in exchange for maintaining a public continuity arrangement. A public continuity arrangement. That was the phrase they used. Not fraud. Not deception. Not identity theft. A continuity arrangement. As if I were a brand. A logo. A corporate asset. Something that could simply be replaced while the original remained unavailable. I closed the folder. My hands were shaking. For the first time since escaping. I cried. Not because I lost my home. Not because I lost my marriage. Not even because another woman wore my clothes. I cried because of one question. When exactly had Daniel stopped hoping I'd come back? After 1 month? 3? 6? Or had he started planning my replacement before anyone officially gave up searching? The answer was waiting inside that house. And I needed to find it. Not as Victoria Hale. Victoria Hale was dead. At least as far as they were concerned. No. If I wanted the truth, I would have to become someone else. Someone invisible. Someone nobody noticed. Someone who could walk through the halls of her own mansion without being recognized. A servant. A cleaner. A maid. And for the first time in my privileged life, I was about to learn what people reveal when they believe you're beneath them. 3 weeks later, I stood outside my estate wearing a navy housekeeping uniform. My hair was shorter. Dyed darker. My posture altered. Glasses hid part of my face. A forged employment record sat inside my bag. The cleaning contractor needed temporary staff. I had made sure of it. The security guard barely glanced at me. The gates opened. Slowly. Silently. And I walked back into my own home. Not as the owner. Not as the wife. Not as Victoria Hale. But as a woman hired to scrub the floors. The woman pretending to be me was upstairs. My husband was somewhere inside. And neither of them knew the ghost had already entered the house. The haunting was about to begin. The first room they assigned me was the west hallway. I used to walk that corridor every morning on my way to the office. Now I was polishing the handrails. Funny how quickly a person can become invisible. The same staff who once stood when I entered a room now walked past me without making eye contact. The same relatives who used to ask for favors barely noticed I existed. Nobody looked closely. Nobody listened. A maid wasn't supposed to matter. And that made me dangerous. The mansion smelled exactly the same. Fresh flowers. Furniture polish. Coffee from the kitchen downstairs. The scent pulled memories out of me faster than I could control. Every corner contained a previous version of my life. A birthday dinner. A business celebration. A Christmas morning. 1,000 ordinary moments. Now all of them belonged to someone else. Or at least that was what everyone wanted to believe. On my third day, I cleaned the master suite. My suite. The room sat at the end of the eastern wing. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything appeared untouched. The cream-colored curtains. The antique writing desk. The artwork I personally selected from a gallery in Paris. It was all still there. Only one thing had changed. The woman standing in front of my closet. Claire. My replacement. She was trying on my clothes. Slowly. Carefully. Like an actress rehearsing a role. I lowered my eyes immediately. Housekeepers aren't supposed to stare. But I noticed something. Something small. Something important. She wasn't comfortable. Not truly. Every few seconds she checked her reflection. Adjusted her posture. Corrected her smile. Almost like she was afraid of making a mistake. The performance exhausted her. Good. That meant pressure existed. Pressure created cracks. And cracks exposed truth. You're new. Her voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up. Politely. Nervously. Exactly the way a maid should. Yes, ma'am. She studied me. For one horrible second I wondered if she recognized me. Then she simply nodded. You seem older than the usual staff. I forced a small smile. Experience helps with cleaning. A strange expression crossed her face. Almost guilt. Then it vanished. Just finish the room. I nodded. She left. The moment the door closed, I exhaled. That had been the first time I'd spoken to the woman living my life. And something felt wrong. Very wrong. She wasn't acting like a criminal. She was acting like someone trapped. That night I couldn't stop thinking about her. A professional impersonator would normally enjoy the luxury, the money, the attention. Yet Claire seemed frightened, careful, constantly monitoring herself, like someone walking across thin ice. The realization bothered me. Because villains are easier to hate than victims. And I wasn't entirely sure which one she was. The answer came 2 days later. I found her crying. Not dramatically. Quietly. Alone. Inside the greenhouse. The old glass structure behind the mansion. One of my favorite places. She sat among the orchids wiping tears before anyone could see them. Then footsteps approached. Daniel. I immediately ducked behind a row of plants. Their voices carried through the humid air. You're falling apart. Daniel sounded irritated. Not concerned. I watched Claire stand. I can't keep doing this. Yes, you can. His answer came too quickly. I didn't sign up for forever. You signed a contract. I signed for 6 months. Silence. Then Daniel stepped closer. I couldn't see his face clearly. But I heard the threat hidden beneath his calm tone. You owe me everything. Claire laughed bitterly. No. I owe you nothing. The greenhouse suddenly felt smaller. More dangerous. Daniel lowered his voice. You walk away, and everything falls apart. Claire looked away. Maybe it should. For the first time, genuine fear appeared inside me. Because this wasn't a partnership. This was control. And Daniel wasn't worried about losing Claire. He was terrified she might talk. That evening I began searching his office. The opportunity came after midnight. The household slept. Security followed predictable routes. The mansion had once been my home. I knew every blind spot. Every hallway. Every hidden corner. Daniel's office sat behind the library. The same office where we built the company together. The same office where he'd promised we'd never keep secrets. Now I was breaking into it. Life has a cruel sense of humor. The room was dark except for city lights beyond the windows. I moved carefully. Desk. Cabinets. Bookshelves. Nothing. Then I noticed something familiar. The painting above the fireplace hung slightly crooked. Daniel hated crooked artwork. Always had. My pulse quickened. I removed the frame. Behind it sat a concealed safe. The code hadn't changed. Our wedding anniversary. Of course. The irony almost made me laugh. A man willing to replace his wife still used her birthday and anniversary for security passwords. I opened the safe. And immediately understood why. Inside sat dozens of documents. Contracts. Transfers. Legal authorizations. Financial records. But one file caught my attention. A black folder labeled Contingency Plan. My stomach tightened. Slowly, I opened it. Every page revealed another layer of betrayal. The impersonation agreement. False medical statements. Fabricated travel records. Forged shareholder documents. Someone had spent months constructing an alternate reality. A reality where Victoria Hale still existed. Only not the real Victoria. The version they controlled. The version that signed whatever they wanted. The version that never asked questions. Then I reached the final page. And everything changed. Because the plan wasn't created after my disappearance. It started before it. Several weeks before it. I read the dates 3 times. Then a fourth. Then a fifth. No matter how many times I checked, they stayed the same. The preparations began before I vanished. Before anyone reported me missing. Before the kidnapping. The room suddenly spun. A terrible possibility entered my mind. One so awful I initially rejected it. But the evidence wouldn't allow me to. Daniel hadn't adapted to my disappearance. He had prepared for it. A floorboard creaked outside. I froze. Someone was approaching. Quickly I returned the documents. Closed the safe. Rehung the painting. The office door opened. I slipped behind the curtain seconds before Daniel entered. My heart hammered against my ribs. Daniel walked directly toward the safe. He opened it. Checked something. Then stood motionless. Almost listening. Almost sensing he wasn't alone. For a long moment neither of us moved. A few feet separated us. One curtain. One mistake. One breath. That was all. Then his phone rang. The tension shattered. He answered and left. I remained hidden another 10 minutes. Only when I was certain he was gone did I finally emerge. Sweat covered my palms. But I had something priceless. The truth. Or at least the beginning of it. When I returned to my staff quarters, someone was waiting outside my door. An old golden retriever. Rusty. My dog. My best friend for 11 years. I hadn't seen him since before the trip. For a moment I simply stared. Then Rusty's ears lifted. His tail started moving. Slowly at first. Then faster. Then wildly. His entire body shook with excitement. Animals don't care about disguises. They don't care about contracts. Or lies. Or fake identities. They remember. And Rusty remembered me. He crossed the distance in seconds. I dropped to my knees. Wrapped my arms around him. Buried my face in his fur. And for the first time since returning home, something felt real. Not the mansion. Not the company. Not the marriage. Just a loyal old dog who never forgot who I was. As Rusty rested beside me that night, another realization formed. Daniel wasn't the only one hiding secrets. Claire was hiding something too. Something big. Something powerful enough to make her cry. Powerful enough to make Daniel nervous. And if I could discover what she knew, the entire illusion might collapse. Because somewhere inside this mansion, the truth about my disappearance was waiting. And I was beginning to suspect my kidnapping had never been random. Not even close. The deeper I dug, the more it looked like somebody had planned my disappearance long before I ever boarded that flight. By the second month of my infiltration, I understood something important. Fear doesn't always come from danger. Sometimes it comes from guilt. And guilt was spreading through Hale Manor like a slow-moving storm. I could feel it in the silences. In the unfinished conversations. In the way people avoided certain rooms. Nobody said anything openly. But something was cracking beneath the surface. The question was whether it would crack before I did. The first move wasn't revenge. It was curiosity. I needed to know how much Claire actually knew. Was she a willing participant? A desperate employee? Or another person trapped inside Daniel's scheme? The answer would determine everything. Including whether I destroyed her alongside him. 3 nights later, I entered the master suite after midnight. The room sat in darkness except for moonlight filtering through the curtains. Claire was asleep. Or pretending to be. I couldn't tell. I moved carefully, quietly, not because I feared being caught, because I feared what I might discover. The woman sleeping in my bed looked disturbingly familiar. For a moment I understood why strangers believed she was me. The resemblance was remarkable. Yet once you looked closer, the differences appeared. Different breathing rhythm. Different posture. Different habits. A different soul. No contract could duplicate that. I placed a folded note on her nightstand. 5 words. Nothing more. Words only the real Victoria would understand. A reference to a private joke from our honeymoon. Something never shared publicly. Something impossible for Claire to know. Then I left. No threats. No accusations. Just a question. A ghostly whisper. A reminder that someone knew the truth. The next morning I watched from the hallway. Claire emerged from the bedroom pale and distracted. She carried the note in her hand. Daniel noticed immediately. What happened? Nothing. You're white as a sheet. She forced a smile. I'm tired. Daniel wasn't convinced. Neither was I. Because Claire kept touching the folded paper hidden in her pocket. Like it was burning her skin. That evening she searched the entire room. Drawers. Closets. Bathroom cabinets. Every corner. Looking for evidence. Looking for explanations. Looking for ghosts. And finding none. Exactly as planned. Over the following week, I escalated carefully. Never enough to seem impossible. Only enough to feel personal. A photograph moved a few inches. A favorite book opened to a specific page. A perfume bottle placed where I used to leave it. Tiny details. Meaningless to everyone else. Terrifying to someone living a stolen life. Claire stopped sleeping well. Dark circles appeared beneath her eyes. Her hands trembled during dinner. The performance was becoming harder to maintain. One rainy evening I overheard another argument. This time in the library. Thunder rolled outside. The house felt unusually empty. Daniel's voice echoed through the room. You need to get control of yourself. Claire laughed bitterly. You think I'm losing my mind. I think you're attracting attention. Maybe because I'm tired of pretending to be your missing wife. Silence. Heavy silence. Then Daniel spoke. Lower your voice. No. You signed an agreement. You keep saying that. Her voice cracked. And you keep pretending contracts fix everything. I stood hidden beyond the doorway. Listening. Watching. Waiting. Claire took a deep breath. Then said something neither of us expected. I didn't know she'd still be alive. The room went silent. So did my heartbeat. For one horrifying second, I forgot how to breathe. Daniel looked at her sharply. What did you say? She immediately realized her mistake. Nothing. Too late. The words were already hanging in the air. I didn't know she'd still be alive. Not missing. Not gone. Alive. Claire knew more than she admitted. Far more. That night I couldn't sleep. Rain tapped against my small attic window while my thoughts raced. The sentence replayed endlessly. I didn't know she'd still be alive. How could anyone make that assumption unless they were told otherwise? Unless somebody assured them I wasn't coming back. Unless somebody expected me never to return. The implications were terrifying. Because it suggested the impersonation wasn't simply fraud. It suggested foreknowledge. Planning. Expectation. Maybe even participation. The next phase required risk. And risk meant exposure. For weeks I had remained invisible. Now I needed contact. Direct contact. I needed Claire frightened enough to tell the truth. But not so frightened she ran. The opportunity arrived unexpectedly. A charity luncheon at the estate. Nearly 200 guests. Board members. Investors. Local officials. The perfect distraction. While everyone occupied the ballroom, Claire slipped away to the upstairs powder room. I followed. Quietly. Patiently. The hallway was empty. The house unusually silent. When she entered the room, I waited 30 seconds. Then stepped inside. The lights remained dim. Claire stood before the mirror. Adjusting her makeup. Trying to look composed. Trying to look like me. I approached from behind. Softly. Almost silently. Then I whispered 4 words. The same 4 words I used to say before every major business meeting. Words nobody else should know. Trust facts, not fear. Claire froze. Completely. The makeup brush slipped from her hand. Neither of us moved. For several seconds she stared at her reflection. Then slowly turned around. The room was empty. Because I was already gone. The scream echoed through the hallway. Not loud. Not hysterical. Just enough. Enough to reveal genuine terror. For the first time, Claire truly believed something impossible. Not because she was foolish. Because somebody had been systematically reminding her of things only Victoria Hale could know. And human beings will believe strange things when guilt and fear combine. The haunting had begun. But something unexpected happened. Instead of pushing Claire toward Daniel, it pushed her away from him. She became withdrawn. Suspicious. Careful. Almost as if she no longer trusted the man who hired her. That interested me. Because fear reveals alliances. And Claire's fear was changing sides. Meanwhile, another ally appeared where I least expected. The estate gardener. Samuel Ortiz. 68 years old. Worked for my family longer than Daniel had. A quiet man who preferred plants to people. I trusted him once. Before my disappearance. The challenge was determining whether I still could. One afternoon I found him repairing irrigation lines near the rose garden. He glanced up as I approached. Then looked back down. For several moments neither of us spoke. Finally he said, "You remind me of someone." My pulse quickened. I remained calm. "Do I?" He nodded. "Very much." I studied him carefully. He continued working. Not pressing. Not accusing. Just observing. Then he quietly added, "Funny thing about flowers." "What?" "They grow toward the truth eventually." I stared at him. He finally met my eyes. And for the first time since returning home, I suspected someone recognized me. 3 nights later, I took the biggest risk yet. I revealed myself. Not publicly. Only to Samuel. The meeting happened inside the greenhouse after midnight. The same greenhouse where Claire had cried. The same greenhouse where Daniel had threatened her. When I removed my glasses and spoke his name, Samuel simply stood there. Silent. Still. Then tears filled his eyes. Not dramatic tears. The quiet kind. The kind people carry for a very long time. I knew. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I knew nobody could forget those roses. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then he hugged me. And suddenly the loneliness I'd carried for over a year felt slightly lighter. Not gone. Just lighter. Samuel became my first real ally. Over the next several weeks we began collecting evidence. Hidden recordings. Copies of documents. Security footage. Conversations. Every piece mattered. Every detail mattered. Because accusations without proof would destroy me. Daniel controlled lawyers. Money. Influence. I needed facts. Enough facts to survive a war. Then came the recording. The one that changed everything. The one Samuel captured accidentally while repairing equipment near Daniel's private office. The audio wasn't perfect. Voices faded in and out. But one sentence came through clearly. Crystal clear. A sentence that made my blood run cold. Daniel's voice. Calm. Controlled. Certain. If she had stayed on that flight schedule, none of this would have become complicated. I listened 3 times. Then 4. Then 5. Each time the meaning became worse. Because Daniel wasn't talking about my disappearance as a tragedy. He was talking about it as a plan that went wrong. A plan. Not an accident. Not bad luck. A plan. The next morning I looked at the mansion differently. The marble floors. The expensive artwork. The family photographs. The smiling faces. For years I believed this house represented success. Safety. Family. Love. Now it looked like a stage. A beautiful stage built on lies. And somewhere inside it, someone besides Daniel knew exactly what happened to me. Someone who had helped construct the illusion. Someone still hiding in plain sight. The problem was that I no longer knew who to trust. Because the deeper we dug into the conspiracy, the more names appeared. And one of those names was about to shock me more than Daniel ever could. The next betrayal wouldn't come from my husband. It would come from my own blood. The first name on Samuel's list nearly made me drop the folder. My mother. Eleanor Hale. For several minutes I simply stared at the page, waiting for my eyes to correct themselves. They didn't. The documents connected her to multiple financial transfers authorized shortly after my disappearance. Nothing illegal on the surface. Nothing dramatic. Just enough involvement to prove she knew something. Something important. Something she never reported. I wanted the evidence to be wrong. I wanted there to be another explanation. A misunderstanding. An accounting error. Anything. Because mothers aren't supposed to participate in their daughter's erasure. At least that's what I'd believed. Until now. The following week I watched her carefully. Observed her routines. Her conversations. The way she interacted with Claire. And slowly a disturbing pattern emerged. My mother wasn't attached to Claire as a daughter. She was attached to her as a solution. A useful substitute. A convenient answer to an inconvenient problem. That realization hurt more than Daniel's betrayal. Because I had married Daniel. I chose him. But my mother had known me my entire life. The truth arrived during an afternoon tea gathering. My mother sat with several friends in the sunroom. Claire beside her. Smiling politely. Performing. Always performing. One guest asked a simple question. How did you survive such a difficult year after Victoria disappeared? My mother sighed dramatically. Then smiled toward Claire. We learned to adapt. Adapt. Not grieve. Not search. Adapt. The word hit me harder than any confession. Because adaptation implied acceptance. Acceptance implied certainty. And certainty implied knowledge. That evening I showed Samuel the evidence. He remained silent for a long time. Finally, he said something that stayed with me. Some people fear loss. I nodded. And some people fear change. Another nod. Samuel looked directly at me. But the most dangerous people fear losing power. Power. Not grief. Not love. Power. For the first time, the entire picture began to form. My company shares. Voting control. Board authority. Inheritance structures. My disappearance threatened all of it. A dead Victoria created chaos. A missing Victoria created uncertainty. But a fake Victoria created control. Meanwhile, Claire was unraveling. The notes. The whispers. The carefully planted reminders. They had accomplished their purpose. Not madness. Clarity. Claire was beginning to understand she had been used too. One evening I found her alone in the greenhouse. Again. Always the greenhouse. Perhaps because glass walls leave nowhere to hide. She looked exhausted. Defeated. Human. For several minutes I simply stood nearby pretending to trim flowers. Finally she spoke. Without looking at me. Do you believe people deserve second chances? The question surprised me. I think it depends on what they did. She laughed softly. A sad laugh. What if they made a terrible choice because they were desperate? I carefully set down the pruning shears. What if they keep making it? Now she looked at me. Neither of us speaking the truth directly. Yet both of us understanding exactly what was being discussed. Her eyes filled with tears. I never thought it would become this. And then she walked away. Leaving me with a certainty I hadn't possessed before. Claire wasn't the architect. She was a participant. A guilty one. But not the creator. The creators were still inside the house. And they were becoming nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. Daniel's mistake arrived sooner than expected. 3 weeks before the annual Hale Foundation Anniversary Gala. The largest event of the year. Investors. Board members. Media representatives. Everyone important would attend. The perfect stage. The perfect audience. The perfect place for a mask to fall. Daniel didn't know it yet. But he had already chosen the location of his own downfall. 5 nights before the gala, Claire finally broke. Samuel and I were reviewing recordings when she appeared in the greenhouse doorway. Her face was pale. Her hands trembling. For a terrifying moment I thought she'd brought security. Instead she closed the door behind her. And looked directly at me. Not at the maid. Not at the disguise. At me. Victoria. The real Victoria. At last. The performance was over. I know who you are. Her voice shook. I said nothing. She continued. I figured it out weeks ago. Samuel stepped forward protectively. Claire raised her hands. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I studied her carefully. Then why are you here? The answer came immediately. Because they're going to destroy me too. For the next 2 hours Claire told us everything. Every contract. Every lie. Every hidden meeting. Every threat. The truth was uglier than I imagined. Daniel hadn't arranged my kidnapping. But he had learned about a planned abduction through a corrupt business associate weeks before it happened. Instead of warning me, he saw opportunity. When I disappeared, he chose profit over rescue. Control over loyalty. Power over love. He assumed I would never return. And once months passed, he doubled down. Recruiting Claire. Manipulating shareholders. Maintaining access to my assets. Building an empire on a lie. My mother joined later. Not because she hated me. Because she feared losing influence. Together they convinced themselves they were protecting the company. Protecting the family. Protecting stability. The oldest lie selfish people tell themselves. That they're helping everyone while helping themselves. But Claire brought something even more valuable than information. Evidence. Recorded conversations. Emails. Copies of agreements. A hidden audio file. And inside that file. The confession. The one we'd been searching for. Daniel admitting he knew about the threat before my trip. Daniel admitting he chose silence. Daniel admitting my disappearance solved problems. Not because he caused it. Because he benefited from it. The distinction wouldn't save him. Not anymore. The anniversary gala arrived on a warm autumn evening. The mansion glowed beneath hundreds of lights. Luxury cars filled the drive. Champagne flowed. String music drifted through the ballroom. Everything looked perfect. Which made the truth even more devastating. I watched from backstage. Not in a maid uniform. Not in disguise. For the first time in over a year. I was Victoria Hale again. My original hairstyle restored. My original gown. My original identity. Yet I felt strangely calm. Anger had burned away months ago. What remained was certainty. Daniel stood on stage. Confident. Polished. Admired. The crowd applauded as he approached the microphone. My wife and I are honored. The words never finished. Because another voice interrupted. Mine. Which wife? The ballroom froze. Completely. Hundreds of faces turned simultaneously. Daniel's expression collapsed. Not gradually. Instantly. Like glass shattering. For several seconds nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody understood. Then Claire stepped onto the stage. Beside me. Not against me. Beside me. The crowd erupted into confused whispers. Two Victorias. One stage. One lie. And nowhere left to hide. I walked toward Daniel. Slowly. Calmly. Holding the microphone. Holding the evidence. Holding the truth. You told everyone I was alive. Silence. You hired someone to replace me. More silence. You knew about the danger before my trip. The room grew still. Then the recordings began. Daniel's voice filled the ballroom. Clear. Undeniable. Authentic. Sentence after sentence. Excuse after excuse. Admission after admission. The crowd listened. The board listened. The press listened. And for the first time, Daniel listened to himself. My mother attempted to leave. Security stopped her. Not because I asked. Because the police had already arrived. Months of evidence had been delivered earlier that day. Investigators. Attorneys. Regulators. Everyone. Prepared. Waiting. Ready. The masquerade was over. Daniel never looked at me while officers escorted him away. Not once. Perhaps guilt prevented it. Perhaps shame. Or perhaps he simply couldn't face the woman he had already buried in his mind. Either way, it no longer mattered. The man I loved had disappeared long before I did. Claire testified. Cooperated fully. Accepted responsibility for her role. The courts would decide the rest. I didn't hate her. Strangely, I couldn't. She had spent a year pretending to be me. Yet Daniel had spent a year pretending to love me. One deception felt far worse. Months later, the estate belonged to me again. Legally. Financially. Officially. Everything had been restored. The company. The shares. The assets. The mansion. Everything. And yet, I felt nothing when I walked through the front doors. Because the place wasn't home anymore. Not really. Homes are built from trust. And trust had died here. One morning I stood on the balcony where I had first seen Claire. The same balcony. The same view. The same sunrise. Only now the house was quiet. Peaceful. Empty. Rusty rested beside my feet. Samuel watered roses below. And for the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I was simply finished. Finished carrying ghosts. Finished carrying betrayal. Finished carrying a version of myself trapped inside this property. That afternoon I listed the estate for sale. 3 months later it belonged to someone else. And surprisingly, walking away felt wonderful. People often ask whether I got revenge. The answer is no. Revenge implies satisfaction. This wasn't satisfaction. It was release. What I gained wasn't victory. It was freedom. Freedom from people who only loved me when I was useful. Freedom from a marriage built on convenience. Freedom from a family that confused ownership with affection. And freedom from the woman I had become while surviving all of it. Today I live near the ocean. A smaller house. A quieter life. No board meetings. No grand galas. No hidden contracts. Just peace. Sometimes that's the greatest fortune a person can inherit. Not money. Not power. Peace. Every now and then I remember the night I stood outside the gates and saw another woman living my life. Back then it felt like the end of everything. Now I understand it was the beginning. Because losing the life I thought I wanted eventually led me to the life I actually needed. And if there's one lesson hidden inside this story, it's this. The people who replace you reveal their character. The people who remember you reveal your worth. And sometimes the most powerful thing a ghost can do is come back alive.